welcome back to Felony Spectator. I am your host, Heather. This is our last episode of 2022. I'm taking December off again because I'd really like to spend some quality time with my family and think less about murder during the holidays. On today's episode, we're talking about the Stephanie Barron case and how she murdered her parents on Christmas morning. So Stephanie Barron was born in 1982 to Stephen and Carla Barron in Tyler, Texas, which is in East Texas. The Barrons were a really well-respected family in Tyler, and Stephanie was also a straight-A student. So they were basically a perfect little family for a really long time. Unfortunately, Carla had to undergo surgery in 1998 because it was discovered that she had a brain tumor. The doctors were able to remove the tumor, but it left Carla with some struggles, and from what I understand, it was stroke-like symptoms. Carla's parents, Stephanie's grandparents, Margaret and DC Toner, lived next door. And when I Googled their address, it looks like it's on the same property. Carla often went next door to help her parents out, but that was getting increasingly more difficult with her cancer recovery. Stephen Barron worked in construction and often had to leave town for extended periods of time. So times were really tough for them for a while. But despite their struggles, neighbors of the Barrons and the Toners said that the families were really nice, church-going people. At 4:20 a.m. on Christmas morning of 1999, a call came into the Smith County Sheriff's Office. It was Margaret Toner, Carol's mom, and the grandmother of Stephanie Barron. She told the operator that someone had broken into her granddaughter's home next door and there was shooting. Her grandmother had come running over and said that she was scared because her parents were still inside. Stephanie had explained that she heard 4 gunshots, which woke her up. The first thing she did was hide in her closet with the phone, which was a landline, but the phone didn't work. She then heard someone come into her room and leave again. When she thought it was safe, she ran out the back door of their trailer home. But on the way out, she saw a dark shadow. She didn't recognize this shadow, but it scared her so much that she ran across the yard to her grandmother's in her bare feet. Sadly, when police arrived to the residence, they would find 2 deceased individuals inside the master bedroom of the home. Officers know Christmas is tough. They get an increase of suicide calls every year. It's very stressful. But a double homicide on Christmas is just a whole different kind of stress, especially one where 2 seemingly innocent people were sleeping soundly and shot to death on Christmas morning. Everyone was really shaken up. When police arrived, they walked through the back door of the home, which was still slightly ajar. They first noticed that there was no Christmas tree, no presents, and no evidence of Christmas at all. There was an empty leather holster and an open box of Remington Peters in the washroom, but no gun. Inside the master bedroom were the bodies of Carla Barron and her husband, Stephen Barron, and 2 small dogs barking. Carla appeared to be shot below the left eye while she was still sleeping, and their Scottish Terrier was still snuggled under her arm. A Chihuahua was also on the pillow above her head, refusing to move. Stephen was on the floor, sort of leaning up against the bed with his arm partially on top of the bed. And officers initially believed this could possibly be a murder-suicide until they saw that Stephen was shot in the back of the head. They also saw that the window was shot out and there was another rogue bullet shot in their headboard. To them, this means that the shooter missed the victims a couple of times and probably had bad aim. Also, during this initial investigation, police would find under the bed in the master bedroom a lockbox with a .25 caliber pistol, a 9mm Beretta, and a pouch containing a magazine with 4 rounds. The sheriff realized that Stephen was actually probably reaching for a weapon under the bed, and that's why he was on the floor. Even further under the bed was another gun case and a .22 caliber 5-shot revolver. Sadly, whoever took their lives didn't give Stephen any time to fight back, even though he was well equipped to try and save his family from intruders. In Stephen's truck, inside the console, in a white sock, was a Grendel 380 model P12 loaded with 10 rounds. Stephen's wallet was also in the truck as well and did contain a Texas concealed handgun license, so he owned all these guns legally. He also had $225 in his wallet, and his credit cards were seemingly untouched. In the console of the truck was also another $200. Carol's wallet also had about $140 inside as well. Upon further investigation inside the home, it didn't appear as though anything was out of place. Nothing was damaged. There was a new computer sitting in the living room, a sewing machine, and their TV was still there as well. The drawers were not pulled out of any of the rooms except for one in the master bedroom, which could have been left open before the Barrons went to sleep. The front door was still locked as well. Stephanie's room was located right beside the front door, and it mostly looked like a normal teenager's room. There was clothes everywhere. Her bed was unmade, although she had jumped out of bed when she heard the shots, and it was slightly messy. The Barron home was a double-wide trailer with a satellite dish on the front corner. There was a few plastic patio chairs on the porch, a bonfire pit in the backyard, and nothing looked out of the ordinary, except that the small electrical box on the Barron home appeared as though it was tampered with. Someone had tried to cut the wires of the smaller telephone wire attached to the home, presumably to cut the phone line, but they had failed though, as the phones were all still working. The grandparents' home next door was quite a nice brick home with white columns on the front porch. The phone wires here were untouched and everything was normal. Now, back inside the Barrons' home, the investigators would find a .38 caliber blue steel 5-shot revolver with wood grips in a laundry hamper from Stephanie's closet. It was tucked inside the pocket of a sweatshirt. The gun was not fully loaded. In fact, there were exactly 4 shots missing, with only 1 left in the barrel. Now, Stephanie had heard 4 shots, and the weapon also smelled like it had recently been fired. So investigators thought that this perhaps was the murder weapon. They also noted that there was marks on the gun as though something was removed from the top of it. Also inside the pocket of the sweatshirt was a small piece of latex glove with a dark smudge which looked a lot like blood. Also in the closet was a t-shirt, a Hilfiger brand, with what appeared to be blood splatter, and a laser light for a firearm in the pocket of some sweatpants. All of these items were brought to the lab for processing. Further in the closet, on the back wall, was a hole cut on purpose. Nothing was inside the wall, but it did seem strange that a young girl would have a hole in her closet wall, almost the perfect size to hide a gun. The detectives remembered that Stephanie said that she heard footsteps down the hall and an intruder came into her room. After the intruder left her room, she made a run for it out the back door. So the detectives reenacted this scenario, and the back door was all the way down the hall on the other side of the trailer. Stephanie's room was at the front of the trailer near the front door. So why didn't she exit through the closest possible door? Instead, she put herself in danger and ran through the trailer towards the footsteps. Investigators also noticed Stephanie's dresser had some photos of her with friends, and they'd see that the males in the photos were throwing up gang signs, and they were also known to police. On her wall was a heart drawn with the words, "I love Dinario." Police needed to know who Dinario was and further talk to Stephanie because her story started to not really make sense. Stephanie agreed to go to the station to give a proper statement, but when detectives tried to speak with Stephanie, she ran away into the bathroom and locked the door. Now, they sort of thought that she was scared, and it did sound like she was throwing up or washing her face. And at the time, they were sympathetic because she did just lose her parents and had to run through brambles in the middle of the night barefoot to get to safety at her grandma's. So of course she would be stressed out, but this would later be an issue. When Stephanie was finally ready to talk, they read her rights, and they assured her that she wasn't a suspect. They just needed to know all the details to solve her parents' murder. They asked her about the writing on the wall, and Stephanie told them that it was her boyfriend, Dinario. They had recently broken up. She somehow pissed him off, but maybe one day they'd get married because they still loved each other. She also explains that she has lots of friends. She does regular teenage stuff like sleepovers. She loves her parents. Her dad is strict and gets mad, but everything is normal. Stephanie admitted that she wrote a fraudulent check and he was really angry about that. When asked if her dad hit her, she says no. Stephanie also goes over Christmas Eve with the detectives. After her shift at her new job at a donut shop, she had gone to the bank and cashed her check. She would give her parents a portion of this check to pay for her car insurance and money for an attorney from the check fraud. She also had to check in at her bail bond office as well because she was technically out on bond. She then goes to the mall alone, and when she comes home, she gives her dad her car keys. And that was the rule since she was grounded. After that, she just went to her room. Her parents would eat dinner in the living room, and Stephanie ate her dinner in the bedroom while watching a movie. She falls asleep around 10:30 p.m. She then woke up to the gunshots, ran through the trailer to the back door where she left the house. Detectives did ask her why she went through the trailer instead of the front door, and her reason was the back door was already open. Another thing detectives questioned was about her closet doors. She had claimed to have hidden in her closet when the intruder was in the house, but her closet door was off the tracks and unable to close. And Stephanie looked confused at this question and said that she didn't remember that at all. Detectives did arrest Stephanie that night on 2 charges of capital murder and held her without bail. Her story just didn't add up. Stephanie would ask for an attorney, and at that point, they can no longer speak with her. During the investigation, the detectives would reach out to family and friends to get more information on the family dynamic. They also needed to figure out what the motive was. Stephanie was a straight-A student with loving parents. What reason could she possibly have to kill her parents? The Barrons were seemingly normal people. Due to their religion, Jehovah's Witness, they didn't celebrate Christmas, which is why their house wasn't decorated. They had been married for 18 years and had 1 daughter together. Recently, they did start having issues disciplining their daughter, but nobody mentioned any abuse. A close friend of Carla's had actually spoken with Stephanie the day of the murders, and she remembered that Stephanie seemed quiet but calm. Stephanie told her the same story about the intruder hiding in the closet and hearing gunshots. And she also mentioned that her phone line was cut, which seemed confusing. Stephanie also didn't cry when they spoke, but this friend assumed it was because she was in shock. This friend also mentioned that Carla was concerned with Stephanie. Stephanie had started to hang out with a rough group of kids. Some of Stephanie's older friends said that Stephanie went wild drinking, doing drugs, and saying she wanted to get pregnant with a black man. Most of them had started to lose touch with her when she started hanging out with this new crowd. Stephen had confided in a friend that Stephanie's behavior had been increasingly troubling. Stephen often worked out of town, so he had a really hard time disciplining her. He also mentioned that he thought that she was being quite promiscuous. She was easily influenced, and he would call her a follower and insisted that she find new friends. He thought this new crowd was influencing her to do illegal things like writing the fraudulent checks. The night before the murder, Stephen had been with a friend burning leaves, and he mentioned that Stephanie was grounded for not closing her checking account that she had overdrawn from the bad checks, which he asked her to do. Stephanie would also tell her mom that she didn't want to close it and she refused. I guess Stephen and Carla weren't always on the same page with discipline. Stephen at one point even considered leaving the marriage due to all the stress. Carla often gave in when Stephanie was being difficult because Stephanie would threaten to run away or take her anger out on Carla. And this just made Stephen more angry. However, at school, Stephanie was a really good kid and had never been disciplined. She wasn't enrolled in any extra activities and basically flew under the radar, but she was a straight-A student when she was in school. Unfortunately, Stephanie had recently dropped out, but not because she wanted to. Her father actually asked her to do that so she could help her mother recover from the brain surgery. Stephen traveled a lot for work, so he wasn't home to help Carla and told Stephanie to get her GED at home instead and look after her mom. And Stephanie didn't want to, and according to Carla, she didn't even help her much anyways and mostly stayed in her room. And this was around the same time that Stephanie went wild. She stopped listening, did her own thing, and got a massive attitude. Carla had also expressed that she was disappointed because Stephanie didn't want any part of their religion. So basically, Life with Stephanie at that point was very stressful. A neighbor had also recently seen Stephanie practicing her shooting with a gun in the backyard. This neighbor had watched her and thought that she had pretty good aim considering she had never shown interest in guns before. Her interest was recent and presumably due to hanging around with Dinario and the guys from the gang. Detectives would then talk to Dinario Jones. The night of the murders, he was allegedly at an apartment in South Tyler for 2 to 3 hours before a friend took him home. He talked to a girlfriend on the phone and then he went to sleep. He denies being Stephanie's boyfriend but admits that they were once dating. Their relationship had ended about 2 to 3 weeks ago because, according to him, Stephanie was caught with another guy. Now, coincidentally, Stephanie had reached out to Dinario's new girlfriend the day before Christmas Eve and told her that she would shoot her if she didn't leave Dinario alone. And this was apparently Stephanie's new thing. She would threaten to shoot people. Being that she was seen with a gun shooting in the backyard, had a hole that could easily hide a gun in her closet, and had a gun in her laundry hamper, it seemed as though Stephanie was the recent owner of a gun, and it made her feel powerful. Even though Stephanie was the main suspect, police were thinking her boyfriend Dinario had some sort of involvement. Dinario Jones attended John Tyler High School and had met Stephanie at the mall when she worked at Apple Fitness. I also learned that Stephanie bought drugs, drank alcohol, skipped school after she started hanging out with Dinario. Detectives would also learn that Dinario was tied to a recent house fire that killed 2 people. Earlier in the year, in October of 1999, around 1:56 a.m., Shelley Ray Haynes called 911 after being woken up by her smoke detector. By the time she wakes up and calls for help, the fire is so bad that she's stuck in her room on the floor, gasping for breath from all the thick smoke. When fire crews arrived, they actually saw it was 2 homes fully engulfed in flames. Shelley and a child about 2 to 3 years old, who they later identified as her daughter Hannah, were rescued from their home, still alive but unconscious. Fortunately, nobody was home next door. Around the corner from Shelley's home, a sheriff deputy goes outside his house to see the fire and notices a young man standing near a pickup truck nearby. This man then slowly rides his bike towards the fire to take a closer look. Now, fires always draw crowds, people are curious, and neighbors want to make sure they're safe. But this sheriff would make a mental note of this person for later. Unfortunately, Shelley and Hannah never regained consciousness and would pass away from their injuries. The fire department would say that Shelley's smoke detector was actually on a table in the hallway instead of mounted on her ceiling. They believed that Shelley may have gotten out of the home sooner if the smoke detector was mounted in the right place, as smoke rises. So this is your reminder to make sure your smoke detectors are working and mounted in the correct places. Now, what ties this fire with the double homicide is that the murder weapon used to kill Stephen and Carla had been stolen from the house set on fire, Shelley's neighbor, Beth Little. Since Beth wasn't home, the fire got really big and out of control and spread to Shelley's home next door. The fire was set intentionally to cover up a burglary. Initially, it appeared as though the fire started from faulty electrical behind the TV, but that would later be debunked after they spoke with an informant. Beth Little, who owned the home that was robbed and then set on fire, her father was a pastor in Conroe, Texas, and he bought her the gun so she could use it for protection. He had built a little wooden box, lined it with green felt, and even made a little area for bullets. Beth had this gun for about 10 years before it was stolen. After it was stolen, Mr. Little bought her a new, identical one because he thought his daughter needed protection. Now, I don't know a lot about American states individually, but from what I read, the town of Tyler is in East Texas. And East Texas is also a little different than the rest of Texas, so much so that they once tried to create their own state. Apparently, they're much more independent people who prefer to take the law into their own hands, and a huge percentage of people have guns and a license to carry their guns. And this is probably why Texas has this reputation of being the Wild West, and maybe why the pastor wanted his daughter to have a gun. So a few weeks after the murders, in January of 2000, the police station got a call from a man who wanted to talk. He requested that an officer pick him up from a nearby gas station. This informant offered information on the Barron case. Stephanie had been at his girlfriend's house the day before the murders, and he had additional information. He offered to share this information in exchange for help with his own legal issues. Now, police couldn't promise protection, but said that they would tell the DA that he helped in an investigation and maybe they would go easier on him. So the informant went on to say that he knew who set the house on fire months earlier and who stole the gun from that home. It was Dinario. Stephanie, Dinario, the informant, and his girlfriend all hung out together all the time. And it was Stephanie who said that Dinario robbed the home and then burned it down to get rid of any evidence. Dinario was known for stealing things and then selling those hot items in Dallas for money to buy drugs. Now, remember there was a sheriff who saw a young man on his bike nearby the fire? Well, it was Dinario. And the informant corroborated that by saying Dinario returned later on his bike to watch the fire department put the fire out. The informant also mentioned that Dinario had stolen Stephanie's car as well while it was sitting at her parents' vacant property when she was in jail. Before Dinario lit the car on fire, he took her CD player, speakers, and an amp that was in the trunk and sold those items in Dallas. And this is what he's known for, being a thief. Dinario was also the kind of person who would carry a 9mm handgun at all times. It was usually kept in the waistband of his pants, but he often showed it off to people. Police asked the informant if Stephanie had ever mentioned that she wanted her parents dead, and he said yes. She had said several times she wanted to kill them. Mostly she said she wanted to shoot them, but at one point she mentioned letting a bunch of scorpions loose in their bed. He also mentioned that Stephanie was a terrible shot and had recently bought a laser to help her with her aim. Stephanie would often talk to Dinario about her father abusing her. In his words, he said that her dad would knock the living shit out of her. It was also said that her father didn't like Dinario because he was black, and her dad started calling her a slut and a hoe for dating a black guy. Stephanie had allegedly called Dinario the night of the murders and asked for help. Dinario agreed, but told her to wait. He wanted to make this look more like a robbery. But Stephanie didn't want to wait, and she went ahead and shot them herself. Stephanie was expected to get a $500,000 insurance payout from the death of her parents. Police needed Dinario to be brought back in to be questioned again, but as a witness. When that happened, the sheriff had asked Dinario if he had any weapons, and he said no. Then they told him that he would need to be patted down, and when they patted him down, he had a loaded 9mm gun in the waistband of his pants. Police had also originally picked him up when he was at the Castle Boys and Girls Club, where it is a felony offense to carry weapons. So he would be arrested for the possession of a firearm. Initially, he refused to speak to police and spent the night in jail before being released on bond. Dinario is then arrested again and brought back to jail the following day and charged with theft and arson based on the statement from the informant. When confronted with the allegations of lighting this house on fire, he confessed. However, he does mention he didn't mean for the house next door to catch fire, and he didn't mean for anyone to die. He had robbed Beth Little's house after learning that she would be away on holidays. He ended up taking a pistol as well as a TV, CD player, jewelry, and some other stuff. He robbed the home because he was mad that he didn't get any money for his birthday. He was feeling sorry for himself. Then after the robbery, he was scared because he wasn't sure if he left any fingerprints behind, so he burned the house down to conceal evidence. He alleges that once he had all the items that he stole, Stephanie and him went to Eastwood Apartments off Highway 64 to sell it all off. They loaded them in the trunk of her car, and Stephanie would notice a guy that she knew, and she offered to sell this guy the gun for $150, and he bought it. Then they drove around selling all the other stuff. Now, even though he swore the gun was sold, the police didn't believe him. But investigators were still waiting for the ballistics tests to confirm. So in November of the year 2000, Dinario was convicted and sentenced to 70 years for the murders of Shelley and her daughter Hannah. Now, there's no evidence to prove that Dinario was in Stephanie's home the night of the murders. The fingerprints all came back inconclusive, and whoever used the gun was wearing latex gloves. The small piece of latex gloves found in Stephanie's sweatshirts didn't have any usable prints on them either. Now, the blood found on the clothing in her closet was actually Stephanie's, not her parents'. Now, this was a problem because police originally thought it would have been blood splatter from Stephanie shooting her parents. Now, allegedly, she was in a fight with someone the night of the murder, but she also said that she had a nosebleed, so no one really knows where the bloody t-shirt came from. The other problem was that they didn't get any gun residue off Stephanie's hand the morning of the murder. Now remember, she had ran scared down the hallway and locked herself in the bathroom during that initial investigation. Now at the time, they thought she was stressed out and throwing up, but she had washed her hands and face, as you do when you throw up. But later, the investigators would question if she was pretending to throw up as a ploy to get the residue off her hands and face. Now, while Stephanie was awaiting trial, investigators also interviewed her cellmate. Her cellmate revealed that while Stephanie never outwardly admitted to killing her parents, she often got quiet when questions were asked. Stephanie also seemed really worried about the testing of her clothing and the gun. And just like everyone else had mentioned, she never showed any remorse or even sadness that her parents were dead. The only time her cellmate ever saw her cry was when Stephanie learned that she might not get any inheritance money. She also once mentioned that she thought Dinario might testify against her, and she didn't want to go to prison for the rest of her life. She also continuously wrote letters to Dinario while in pretrial. Stephanie tried to disguise her writing in all of these letters and used fake names, but her cellmate had made copies of some of these letters and gave them over to the police. One in particular was very telling, and it read, quote, "I guess I'm gonna have to tell my lawyers what really happened to my parents, especially if they're reading my mail. I'm fucked, I think," end quote. Then there was a confession letter, a letter she wrote and was going to flush down the toilet, but she stuffed it in her bra because prison guards barged into her cell to do a cell check. Stephanie would later say that this letter was planted in her bra and she didn't put it there. Anyway, she writes that she woke up at 2 a.m. and got dressed. She paced the house and kept hearing Dinario's voice in her head saying, "Do it, do it." She also heard the voice of her dad just yelling at her. She eventually decides to do it, and she held the gun and pointed the laser to the back of her dad's head. At 4:08, she pulled the trigger. Stephanie accidentally got him in the back of the neck. Her mom sits up, so she shot her mom in the face. Then the laser falls off the gun, so she ran to the bathroom and turned the light on. Stephanie sees that her dad's trying to get up, so she shot again and missed. Stephanie shoots a fourth time without aiming and hit her mom's arm. Her dad would fall down beside the bed and stopped moving. Stephanie then ran to her room, got some pliers, and cut her own telephone wire, or so she thought. Then she went back into the house, stuffed her clothes in the bottom of the hamper with her sweatpants on top, and the gun still in her pocket. After that, she runs to her grandma's. The investigators are quite happy about this letter because the details were correct, something only the killer would have known. The gunshot wounds and exactly where the gun and laser were found. When Stephanie finally would be going to court for the murder of her parents, the police were hoping that everything they had would be enough. Then an hour before the trial, ballistics reports come back proving that the gun in Stephanie's closet was the murder weapon. The same gun stolen from Beth's Little that Dinario insisted was sold. Stephanie had it all along. That would be the final piece of evidence to prove she was the killer. Stephanie's attorney had her plead guilty to avoid a trial. While Stephanie was giving her plea, she finally cried, and cried really hard. She would be convicted and given 75 years in Texas prison. She also must spend a minimum of 30 years before she can begin to apply for parole. While in prison, Stephanie has changed her story. She now says that she's innocent and tried to appeal her sentence. Stephanie also got married in 2005 while in prison to a man named Stephen Roloff, who is twice her age. They had previously met each other prior to her meeting Dinario. Steve worked in management in Tyler, Texas at a car dealership and met Stephanie at Apple Fitness when she worked there at the mall. Stephanie started dating Dinario and Steve had moved away. Then he saw her on TV after her conviction and wrote her a letter in prison. And she replied that she was innocent and he fell in love with her. I guess she explained to him that she was getting manipulated by Dinario, which isn't surprising. Dinario had gone to Stephanie's house Christmas around 2 a.m. Now remember, she had 2 dogs. Well, the dogs didn't bark because apparently she used to let him in all the time and they knew him. Side note, I don't know a lot of little dogs that don't bark when someone enters a house. Dinario and Stephanie weren't really together for that long, so I'm not sure that I buy that. Anyway, they would have sex, then Dinario shot her parents. He left the gun at her house on her bed and she drove him home. She said she was really scared and didn't know what to do. So she changed her clothes, hid the gun in her hamper, and ran to her grandparents' house pretending there was an intruder. Stephanie and Dinario did write letters back and forth from prison, according to Stephen, and these letters apparently prove that Dinario admitted to the murder. Stephen did give these letters to the detectives, but nothing came of it because the letters were vague and the wording wasn't Dinario admitting to anything. He once said that he'd take the fall for her, but he never truly admitted to it. Stephen has unfortunately passed away in 2019, and Stephanie filed for divorce due to Stephen's passing. There's also information online that Stephanie's grandfather, Kenneth Ray Barron, told her to plead guilty. Kenneth Barron was a lawyer but was disbarred in 1997, and according to Stephanie, he spent some time in prison. When he was released, he was broke. So Kenneth told Stephanie to plead guilty because then she wouldn't be eligible for the inheritance and it would go to him. He has also since passed away as of 2013, so he can't defend himself against these claims. My thoughts? Stephanie was only 17 when she murdered her family. She threw her life away for a boy. I am sure he encouraged her to do it for the insurance, but I don't think Dinario pulled the trigger. Someone like Dinario wouldn't have left the murder weapon behind in the house, and he probably would have taken the money out of the wallets or robbed the house to make it more believable. That was Dinario's thing, robbing people and selling their belongings for drug money. To me, it doesn't seem like he would just murder people for no reason and not cover his tracks. I mean, he literally burned a house down because he robbed it. So why wouldn't he get rid of evidence in a murder, which is way worse? Stephanie truly wasn't a criminal, so she didn't know how to get rid of the weapon or to make it look like a robbery. Instead, she just left everything in her closet. Quite the rookie mistake. I think Stephanie was just angry at her parents because they were trying to control her. For good reason. I think Stephanie was just really angry at her parents because they were trying to control her. She had also recently been dumped by Dinario, so she probably thought having them out of the picture would make her life easier. Then she could date Dinario without any interference. Maybe she was also hoping this would impress Dinario. He was in a gang and murder would have given her street cred. He would then take her back and they'd be happy together with all this insurance money. She was young and stupid. She will be allowed to apply for parole after 30 years. So if she's smart and starts to admit her role and shows remorse, I have a feeling she'll get out early. I doubt she will serve her full 75 years. But she'll still be old regardless, and I can't imagine that she'll be able to do much with her life. But those are the consequences for her actions. I would love to know what you guys think. Was it Stephanie? Was it Dinario? Was it both of them? Leave me a comment and also hit subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for joining me here at Felony Spectator, and we will see you in 2023.